I'm Layla White. I'm the CEO and founder of Tech Passport, and I'll be presenting a panel today to talk about how DeFi can transform lending and borrowing. So I'm joined by an esteemed group of panelists this morning. So we have Chandresh Aharwar from Uniled, Chris Bradbury from Oasis, Rakesh Lavi from Unicred, and Richard Crook from Dazzle. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning, guys.
So I'm conscious that we've got quite a lot to get through today, and a really hot topic, actually, and a really interesting area. Certainly in terms of how we're looking at DeFi and growing, it's certainly a booming market since we've kind of first breakout into the sector. I really wanted to get going by talking about how does DeFi compare with TradFi? Who'd like to answer that first question?
Yeah, I can jump in if you like. So, I mean, from my point of view, I think if we look at like TradFi and fintech in particular, I think the closest we've really got is like crowd lending and crowd borrowing from a personal and business point of view, really. And I think the biggest comparison you can have with DeFi really is just the trust aspect. I mean, in TradFi, there's a huge trust aspect where you're trusting like the centralized company behind the scenes. Really, you're doing that lending or borrowing from. And if they disappear, then as we've seen with crowd lending already, it's very difficult to get your money back, and it's a very, very long process. The other thing is just like you look at deposit and withdrawal times or whatever, and it could take it's minutes in DeFi, kind of without that trust and you're in control of your money, and it can be days or sometimes weeks in TradFi. So for me, like when you're looking at comparing the two, it's the trust and the control of your money, which is the biggest things.
Yeah, just to like quickly add on to what Chris has said, I think there are two primarily important points, right? One is the whole trustlessness that is involved in DeFi, that there is no counterparty risk. I think that is one of the major factors that is determining the success of DeFi. And what I believe, and it's my opinion, that it is the most fair system that exists in the world right now, where nobody is picking winners and losers. Like you can go to a bank, he might decide to whether give you a loan or not, depending on what your credit score is. So, your financials, what kind of relationship you have with that person. And he can determine if you either get a loan or you don't. So we are eliminating all those kind of biases and establishing a very, very fair system driven by technology, which treats everyone, whether in Asia, America, Africa, anywhere in the world, exactly the same way. And I think until now, there was no opportunity for us to say that there has been a very fair system. And I think blockchain technology is enabled DeFi is the most fair system of borrowing and lending that can exist at any point of time.
That's great. And how do you think that TradFi and DeFi are converging at the moment? Who would like to answer that question? How are the two worlds now converging? So we're obviously seeing opportunities. How do you see that converging?
Yeah, I could jump in again then. I actually don't think they're converging too much right now. I think there's still a very big split. Unless you're talking about like onboarding in centralized exchanges using a traditional bank account or something and moving your money to DeFi, I think the gap is still really big. I think one area where we are seeing a big convergence is actually in Maker DAO, where they're actually onboarding real world assets, and there's real kind of companies now borrowing DAI from obviously the Maker protocol that's getting converted obviously straight into USD, which obviously isn't perfect, like the perfect long-term flow. But I think for me, that's the first big kind of TradFi DeFi adoption right now.
Richard, what do you have an opinion on this as well? Like, does that mirror what you were thinking in terms of how the two worlds are converging, or there are big gaps still?
Yeah, I think you're seeing absolutely that. The novelty we're seeing right now is that crypto has worked out that they do actually have an asset in its own right. MakerDAO is most obvious, and we're now seeing projects who are connecting into MakerDAO actually use that and that $2 trillion market as a asset base as collateral for loans in the real economy. Now that is a very different way of looking at this than we have been doing for the last couple of years, where MakerDAO has been effectively lending to other parts of the crypto domain, but now we're actually seeing the crypto domain lending its crypto out into the real economy. And I think that's where you're starting to see crossover, not just between TradFi and DeFi, which is a different kind of convergence, but actually now you're seeing the crypto or DeFi space started to drive the real economy, and that looks much more set to eat the TradFi's lunch than the age-old conversation as to whether TradFi or DeFi are different or the same thing.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? And I think the path that this will take, really, quite, especially with the introduction of crypto piece. So my next question, I'm going to ask Rakesh. How's the innovating lending and borrowing on the big scale, on the grand scale? How do you think it's innovating it?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you properly. Can you come?
So how do you see DeFi innovating lending and borrowing? What do you see as happening currently in the industry?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, right, the way blockchain technology is enabled, uh, people to borrow and lend in a completely trustless manner, where you don't have to give your identity, and the whole Web 3.0 and how it's enabled people to borrow and lend and keep custody of their assets. I think that is the biggest thing that DeFi has established. And I think that is we saw in July that Aave, one of the leading DeFi providers, that they are coming up with something called Aave Pro, which basically talks about onboarding institutional investors onto their Aave lending protocol. So we have to see. I mean, I think there is a trade-off here, right? The way we see DeFi and TradFi, right? Do we continue go through the Web 3.0 model and have only people have this trustless mechanism going, or we kind of have a hybrid where traditional guys get involved through a KYC kind of a mechanism, and become part of the whole DeFi ecosystem. So I think there is a trade-off, and the whole community has to look at itself, take a long hard look at itself and decide what road it wants to choose. Ideally, if I'm coming from a purist standpoint, that we should go through the Web 3.0 route, where the custody lies with with the people and with the community, and we do not do a KYC led lending and borrowing, which kind of skews the whole ethos of crypto.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, really. I think when you look at TradFi, which is a highly regulated environment, it's something that we've been used to for a long time. It's something that everyone's become accustomed to. And then obviously moving into the more digital area, the finance sector, fintech is obviously still an evolving kind of place, but especially with TradFi. And like, how do we look at these as becoming inhibitors for adoption potentially? And how do we amalgamate that whole KYC piece in? Do we see any of these kind of, like, from a regulatory perspective? Are these any kind of inhibitors, or what do you think will happen in the future?
No, I think, see, some of the analysis that we did as part of my project is that the entire volume of borrowing and lending in DeFi comes from about 50,000 wallets. And we have not even seen, the Genesis level adoption for DeFi. And I think Ether as a base is the way Ether has seen a lot of adoption, and it has a barrier to entry, right? Because the gas fees and all that. I think that has been a very very huge stumbling block for adoption of DeFi into the space. And what happens is only people with money get to be on the platform of Ether. So I think the whole L2 protocols that are coming up, which can lower gas fees, and if it can attract volume like what Ether has done, uh, I think then adoption will increase. But if we are seeing the kind of gas prices that are there on Ethereum right now, I think we will see that it is going to act as a barrier to entry, and adoption is going to be very staggered, and is only going to be limited to high value wallets and high net worth people. So I think in that sense, the community has to look at it on how borrowing and lending and DeFi can be advanced at the same speed and velocity like how it's been adopted in Ether.
Rakesh, what's your sorry, is it Trandesh? Sorry, Chandresh, what's your view on that as well? Do you agree with those kind of barriers to entry? Are there any other kind of points from your perspective you see is holding us back from really breaking out of its early adoption bubble?
Sorry, was that to me?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think the challenges it's got is it is an unregulated space. It is a white heat of innovation, while the rest of TradFi is the rest of finance is swamped in regulation from the tsunami that came through in '08. So you bring up AML, KYC, CTF. They're all the very basic health and hygiene that will be applied to this area. Um, it is debt, and it is a debt market that we have created here. It's notably innovation that we did with security tokens a couple of years ago, and we recognized we could raise capital using tokens. There's no different here. If it looks like debt and it smells like debt, it probably is debt. If you're taking deposits from someone and returning them a yield or an interest, the regulator is going to call it debt, and you can see that from the major participants in this space who are cleaning up their code to try and remove all references to lending or borrowing because they're worried that the regulator might think that this is debt. Trust me, the regulator knows it's debt. They've seen this before. So it's only a matter of time before actually the real players here recognise that they're in a regulated area, a regulated space, take regulation willingly, and become regulated entities. So it is not it's a movie we've seen before.
I think I think just on that topic though, like there's some huge question marks around the regulation, right? There's obviously two very different kind of models that are in play here. You've got the front ends, which obviously are backed by some sort of entity, simply just to be able to run a front end, and then you've got the protocol level. And I think the big question really is where does that regulation kind of fit? But I'm not so sure if the regulation is the thing holding back DeFi as well at the moment. Like you've obviously got the high gas fees and so on. That is very difficult. But I think one of the biggest things as well is just the UX. Like we're still in an incredibly new market. Like this is like some of the earliest days still. Even if you just look at some of the protocols, like we're only just starting to see kind of fixed rate protocols kind of spinning out now, which is really just the very basics of finance, really. But the UX has always been a secondary thought in this space. And kind of rightly so, right? The protocols are the things that need like the priority development, but they're working now and showing really great adoption. But I think if you look around DeFi, the UX in DeFi is way short where it needs to be for real adoption, and UX always wins, right? So like UX is king in a lot of places.
No, absolutely. In terms of the regulatory side, is there a concern that perhaps whilst it might not speed up, it might not hold things back right now? Is there a concern that the DeFi platforms, will they be ready from a regulatory perspective? Is there a chance that it could hold things back in the future, or do you see that these companies are becoming prepared for it, understanding how like predecessors have gone before with other kind of toolings or platforms that have become regulated? Do you think that that's going to be adopted and be ready for it, or do you think there's going to be a potential kind of knock-on effect?
I think if you're looking at the front ends, and if it's the front ends that in theory have to be regulated, and I don't think it's any different to looking at how fintech was regulated kind of in 2013, 2014 with crowdfunding and so on. Like there are so many APIs out there now to hook straight into KYC and AML stuff. Like applying KYC and AML blocks on users and making sure only verified users use your platform, like talking really like kind of countries that have good KYC and AML APIs. So like the UK and so on is a great example, but that shouldn't be difficult to apply that straight up. Again, if you start talking that regulators want to apply regulations to the protocols, then that's a completely different thing, and how that would ever work is anyone's guess, I think, right now.
So the interesting part here is that there's a number of schools of thought, and people are coming at this in different ways. Some are just trying to avoid, and there will be actors who will just simply try and bounce between jurisdictions to avoid and duck, dive, weave. It probably won't end nicely for them. There are those that are looking for the rule book to change, and good luck with that. It will change, but it's much slower than your business model. And interestingly, we've even seen some of the larger players, Coinbase is a good example, who wish that the rulebook could change for them in the US. And they've got deep pockets and they're pushing, but I wouldn't say they're pushing on an open door. The rules will be applied against them before they get to change them, I suspect. And then last but not least is those that are recognizing that rules aren't changing. You have a rule book, you're going to have to follow it. And to that last point about, do we regulate the ports or do we regulate the ocean? The people running the websites, the people on the front ends, they're going to get regulated just as the exchanges did. No one disagrees with that. What is interesting is the debate about, are we regulating the sea, the ocean, these protocols that have been created? Do we actually start to hold to account the people that deploy the contracts on these public chains, and they are the throat to choke for the regulator? It's not. It's a very early days in that conversation, and these are all schools of thought. Not that I hold an opinion on this, just that these are the conversations that are out there right now.
Great stuff. I still think quite a few challenges to go through potentially. So wrapping up, I'd like to ask each of you, what are your predictions for this area? What do you think is going to happen in the next 12 months through to 5 years? What do you predict for this particular area? Chandresh, would you like to go first? We haven't got Chandresh. Chris, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing huge growth already, right? Like the growth of new users coming in. I mean, we're in a bull market, and we've been in the bull market for a long time, and we see growth with that. So I think the price is going to drive kind of how quickly this place can grow. Like we saw in 2018, we saw a lot of users kind of disappear when that price kind of dipped for almost 12 months. But there were some great projects building in the background. So I think the next 12 to 18 months is going to be a little bit dependent on that. But I think you're going to see more growth. I think we're going to see more protocols come out that we didn't even think were possible kind of 6 months ago. Like there's some amazing things constantly being worked on in this space. And I think regulation might get a tiny step closer, but I still think 12 months is too soon to have anything realistic. And I think people are just going to keep maximizing the availability of DeFi that's open to everybody over the next 12 months, and we're just going to see this market grow. I don't think there's anything to hold it back right now.
Yeah, I think just to add to what you said, we have to look at it from a very macroeconomic lens, right? The amount of money printing that is happening, you see the infrastructure bill that's coming out. Never in history have all assets which are negatively correlated, like gold and stocks, everything is going up. So as Chris rightly said, prices is going to drive this whole market, this whole ethos, and we are going to see a lot of adoption. And in that sense, we want more retail participation, and I think that is only going to happen, as I mentioned earlier, with development happening on layer 2 solutions, because ETH right now is a real barrier to entry.
Brilliant. And Richard, what are your predictions and what are your thoughts for the next coming few years?
Yeah, I don't disagree with either of the other two, which would be that the genie's out of the bottle. Anyone that thinks that this is going to go away or they can avoid it, it's definitely a growing market. But what we're probably looking at as we head out into 22 and over 23 is that actually we're reminded of the last line of Animal Farm, where the creatures outside looked from pig to man and from man to pig and from pig to man again, but already it was impossible to say which was which. The convergence of TradFi and DeFi will continue. So that final irony is that these are the same thing. They will be the same thing. It is only a matter of time.
So I think just one more point. You have to look at it from how TradFi is also going to resist DeFi, right? So there are a lot of institutions, like as far as I know, there are at least 500,000 people just working in back office in traditional finance companies in the US at least, and across the world it's probably more. So this whole thing's comes down to custody. So right now, the custody of our stock shares is with a third party, right? So they can make money out of it. So if you take the custody out of these huge financial companies and give it in the hands of the retail participants, they're going to lose a lot of money, right? They are not able to make money out of any futures trading that they can do with that custody of the stocks and shares that they hold. And this money that they were making is directly going to be transferred to the people. So I think the next 12 months we will also see a lot of friction that is going to happen between TradFi and DeFi. And because the genie is out of the bottle, as he said, they will have to come down, swallow this bitter pill, and come to a conclusion that DeFi is something that's going to stay, and there's nothing that they can do about it, because crypto is a permissionless system, and I don't think they can do anything about it.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly even within the area that I work in and working with institutions, financial institutions, when there's a change that's coming, it's about taking those institutions along on a journey and presenting them with the benefits. And you're always going to have that initial pushback because it's a change, and there's always this concern about lack of roles, losing jobs, etc., and losing that control. But as we're seeing, is with the further we go on into the 21st century, technology is evolving, and this is a natural progression in my eyes, in terms of the next thing to evolve. But quite rightly, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Rakesh. Institutions are going to see this as a bit of a pain for them, and I think it could be a barrier for entry for this, or a barrier for growth or rapid growth. But I think the key now over the next 12 months and up to 5 years is convincing and demonstrating the value for money that DeFi can offer, cost savings, optimizations, and these are the key things to drive the change, because you're always going to get those who are reluctant to make the change and reluctant to give up that power. But I think that as you start to see more areas using it outside of institutions, I think that's where it's going to grow, and we'll start to see the benefit. That's my prediction. I think it'll be a bit of a curve before we get there. Cool. Anyone else have anything to add before we pass it over to see if there are any questions? Let's see if we've got any questions. I can't see anything. I'll give it a minute just in case. No, it looks like that's it. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. It was really, really good to talk to you. I've certainly learnt some new things today. And thank you for joining, and have a lovely day.
Layla, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Cheers.
Guys.